So today, the topic I want to talk about is the idea of what it means to be natural. And there's a couple of reasons for this. One being that it came up recently on a post inside of this group, inside of the Natural Christian Home Birth group. And it was a circumcision post, which you guys, the circumcision posts tend to blow up in this group. They blow up and they get, people have very strong opinions about this topic and can be very crusading about it, which I actually understand because I have some deep personal feelings about it as well. But whenever a circumcision post comes up, I have a lot of moderation work to do. And that this time, actually, Melissa, the co-moderator, helped with that a lot. But I think one of the things that comes up for me when we talk about circumcision is the word natural, as this group is named, Natural Christian Home Birth. So I wanted to talk about what I mean when I say the word natural, because this is the flavor that's going to carry through in the way that we moderate this group. It's the way that's going to, it's the flavor that's going to flavor every product that I make, like my courses and my memberships and programs are all pretty deeply embedded in both the identity of Christian and the identity of natural, right? So to start, I just want to talk about what the definition of natural is in a more general sense. And in a more general sense, according to the American Heritage Dictionary of the English language, present in or produced by nature, conforming to the usual or ordinary course of nature. That's pretty simple, right? But here's what makes it interesting when we're Christians. Nature is creation. Like, nature is God's creation. It is the work of his hands, he spoke it into existence, right? It is the product of the brilliant imagination of our Creator God, who spoke into existence the natural world around us. And it's worth noting that what he said about it, each step of it, every time he spoke into existence, another part of what we call nature, he said, it's good. It's good, right? So we have a unique take on it as believers. We're not worshiping that which is natural like the pagans would, right? Paganism is really kind of like the elevation of and the worship of the natural world. And for us, when we're followers of Jesus, that's not what we're doing. We are respecting it. We are caretakers of it. And we see it as a way that God points to himself. We take care of it and we respect it because God made it and because he called it good. It's not because we think it's higher than he is, but it is an expression of his character. And Psalm 19:1 says that all of nature functions basically to declare the glory of God and to point us to him. Like, creation leaves us a witness of the truth of our God. So that's why we esteem nature. That's why I esteem it. For me, whenever I jump into exploration of the natural world, and I'm a total nature nerd, the kids and I have all these insect and plant and tree identification books, and we're always Googling things and finding nature specimens, and we have nature shelves in our yard. We love nature. And one of the reasons is because the more I dive into it, the amount of intricate brilliance in something as small as a single seed packet on a common weed is so astounding to me that it leads me into worship. It leads me to wow, God, you're incredible. You're so good, right? I don't know, if you're a nature nerd, raise your hand. I'm sure I can't be the only one. And so I have to believe that in general sense, we can't really improve upon nature because he's already called it good. He's made it complete. And yes, it's under the curse, and I'll come back to that shortly. But when we think we could do a better job with nature than the Creator has done with it, we're usually in for a bit of a humble reckoning. Let me give you a few examples. Okay, on a small scale, let's think about cocoons and chrysalises. We have done this lots of times. We gather monarch caterpillars and we feed them and we watch them turn into chrysalises and we wait for them to emerge from the chrysalises. And there's always a temptation to want to peel that chrysalis away from the butterfly to kind of like help it out, especially since it seems kind of like a painful, long drawn out, like stretching experience for the butterfly. You're like, maybe I should help you. Well, what would happen if we did help them is that butterfly would die. Same with, we have chickens in our backyard, and we had some eggs that one of our hens went broody, and she sat on eggs and they were fertilized. And so after the incubation period, they wanted to start emerging. Obviously, chicks hatch. The temptation that is often there when one is watching eggs hatch or chicks emerge from eggs is to chip away the shell for them. Again, if you do that, the chick will die, right? Okay, let's take another example. GMO foods, genetically modified organisms, were made for good purposes. Humans were like, we have a world hunger problem. If we could make these crops be resistant to pests and able to grow closer together, we could feed more people. It was a good intention, right? A good intention they thought will improve through our technologies the nature of this seed so that it behaves differently so that we can get this result we want. Well, what's happened from that? Like, what's happened? You guys know what's happened? You probably do. What's happened is that the doing of that is killing off our honeybee population. It's therefore also imbalanced and disrupted the ecosystems. It's created a need for even more reliance on more fertilizers and more pesticides. You have less robust crops. There's chemical runoff into our drinking water, and we see an increase of cancer and other diseases in humans. So we thought we could improve on this nature thing. And when we tried to do that, it's biting us in the butt. Granted, the government still won't acknowledge that. It won't acknowledge it at all, but it's true. Another example would be deforestation. If you went to forestry college, you would learn that trees compete for each other. They compete for resources in the forest. So if we can thin out the forest and take down the trees that are dying or the trees that are like the wrong species and try to simplify the situation, then maybe the forest would do better. And in the times when people have done that, when they've tried to bring a forest down to being monospecies, those forests are vulnerable to sickness and death. And the whole ecosystem of the animal and plant life suffers. And then we've wiped out almost 50% of the world's trees already, which then has an implication for our air, like our oxygen. Okay. So I just find like this theme emerges that like nature is good. It knows what it's doing. Even if we don't understand, it knows what it's doing because God made it that way on purpose. So now let's like connect this to the idea of birth, right? Well, actually, first let me say this. It reminds me of Job, chapter 38. It's the one where, so Job, had so many terrible things happen to him. And he was like questioning God. He was like, airing out his heart and his grievances to the Lord. And the Lord came back to him and said, who is this that obscures my plans with words without knowledge? Brace yourself like a man. I will question you and you shall answer me. Where were you when I laid the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off its dimensions? Surely you know. Who stretched a measuring line across it? On what were its footings set, or who laid its cornerstone, while the morning stars sang together and the angels shouted for joy? Who shut up the sea behind doors when it burst forth from the womb? When I made the clouds its garment and wrapped it in thick darkness? When I fixed limits for it and set its doors and bars in place? When I said, this far you may come and no further. Here's where your proud waves halt. And I think a little later down, this is a really long chapter, I encourage you to read it. There's some place in there I think he talks about, from whose womb comes the ice? Who gives birth to the frost? Oh no, that's not what I was looking for. Someplace where he talks about animals giving birth too, I think, if I remember correctly, but I won't waste my time looking for it at this moment. Anyway, so there's like this kind of like, we need to stand in like a little bit of humble reverence before what God has created. And so when it comes to birth, and to my whole life really, my posture on this idea of what's natural leads me to certain kinds of decisions. And this is me speaking personally, and you may or may not come to the same conclusions, but it leads me to refrain from helping my immune system with injections. It leads me to abstain from eating highly processed and chemical-laced foods as much as possible. It leads me to keeping my baby boy's genitals intact. This is why my boys are not circumcised, is because there is no reason in nature for that to happen, right? God made that he gave them a foreskin for a purpose. It leads me to choose herbal tinctures and essential oils and food and nature-based remedies for any disease or injury in our family. Because how incredible that God has actually embedded into his creation all that we need to heal ourselves when we're sick. I'm not Catholic, but I got a Catholic Bible recently because I was curious about the extra books they have. And there's one in there where it talks about like the Lord has given us the plants for medicine or something like that, which I just love. Anyway, it also, my reverence for God's goodness and completion and how he's made nature leads me to feel some reluctance about considering tubal ligation or vasectomy or any other form of bodily modification. Because how do I know, like, whether or not that little tweak to those tiny little tubes in the reproductive system don't have some sort of holistic effect on the whole system of the body, which was made to work in balance and conjunction and cooperation with each other, right? It leads me to my refusal of hormonal birth control. The hormonal system is delicate and complex and incredible, and I'm not going to mess with that. It also leads me to learning to let the cycles of my body, like my menstrual cycles and the seasons of nature around me. I live in a state where we have all 4 seasons, and each season requires and invites us into different things. So like honoring that, and that when there's fewer daylight hours, I'm going to live a little differently than I live when there's longer daylight hours. There's so much of God's wisdom embedded into his created world. And when we position ourselves to see that and honor it and try to cooperate with it, we have an opportunity to experience God's attentive care in some new and unique ways and to be led deeper into worship. So when it comes to birth, I kind of start with an assumption that of this question, like this is kind of like the question I want to start from. How has God designed this process of birth to work? And how can I stay out of its way so that it can unfold in the way that he designed it to? And the assumption in this question is that the way it was made is good, and that it wasn't designed with care providers and interventions and monitoring in mind as a prerequisite for it to work, right? Am I preaching to the choir here? So then when we're moving through our pregnancies and we have an opportunity, we'll have lots of options for different tests and measurements and monitoring, right? I like to filter each decision through kind of that same filter of, well, okay, is this intervention or this test part of the nature of birth? Is it essential to its nature? Will it help or hinder the unfolding of God's brilliant design in birth? Not very many things make it through that filter. Not very many things make it through. And when you're in planning your birth plan, like what you're going to do during your labor and delivery, applying the same filter, not very many things are going to make it through. And that's, I think, because sometimes when we try to add on to something that's already good, it just makes it less good. Like it creates problems by trying to solve problems that don't even exist. But then that one problem solving or that one problem creating intervention creates the need for yet another and another and another. We call this the cascade of intervention. And this can happen at home births in a different and lesser extent, probably, just as it can in hospital births if we're not careful. And especially as midwifery becomes more medicalized and more licensed and more regulated by medically minded institutions. So the most commonly accepted definition of a natural birth that I've been able to find is probably a birth which happens vaginally and without drugs. But when I'm looking at it through this filter that I've just been talking about, I feel that that definition is probably sets the bar a little low. So I have actually gravitated towards using phrases like physiological birth and undisturbed birth a lot more in my like personal language that I use with clients and students, and just in the way that I even speak on social media. But I named my Facebook group Natural Christian Home Birth because I think the word natural is the one that people think of first. Like it's more of a term that people are more likely to Google or search for, right? And so I wanted people to be able to find this space But the word natural has some limitations if we're thinking it merely means to get one's baby out of one's vagina without help from instruments and possibly without drugs. I'm aiming for something a little bit different than that in the way that I teach, and the way that I go through and navigate my own pregnancies and births. So that's my kind of definition and thoughts on faith. Are you tracking with me? I haven't had a single comment this whole time, so I'm not sure if we're Mia says undisturbed. I like that. Yeah, like undisturbed from the way that God made it to be, right? And so I've become rather devoted to trying to understand what is undisturbed birth. What does that look like? Because we're not usually seeing that in very many places, are we? I mean, certainly not on the media. Even a lot of the heartwarming YouTube videos of births are very intervened. Like they're very disturbed, very disturbed. So I'm having a chocolate break. So back to the disclaimer about nature doesn't always work well, right? Because, I mean, scripture tells us that creation also groans and waits. It's a waiting with us for the redemption of like the new heaven and the new earth when Jesus returns again. And so creation is also subject to the effects of the fall and to the effects of the sin of humans who have not been good caretakers for it. And we can't necessarily expect to live our entire lifestyles out of sync with God's natural design for our bodies, and then have a beautiful undisturbed natural birth. You know, like I think that we have to feed that that lifestyle even before our births. But needless to say, even when we're doing everything right, there's still going to be times when it doesn't quote unquote work, when you're planning a really beautiful free birth, you've entrusted yourself to God in it, you are committed to not disturbing it, and something happens, right? Like that, there's no way around that. I can't pretend there's not. So I don't mean to like elevate, like pursue the natural at all costs, even if it means you and your baby die. That's not me. Nature will sometimes fail us. It will sometimes go awry, or there will be things that happen in it that seem cruel and harsh. Just like, honestly, it's hard for me to watch like nature documentaries where you're watching like the animals prey on other animals. And I'm like, God, are you sure that was a good idea? And like birth and death have always been really closely linked. And that's always a real possibility that lingers on the edges of our birth experiences. So I'm not trying to downplay that. And I think that in those times when nature does get off course in her births, we're going to seek corrective measures. We're going to seek medical help and attention, surely. But what I don't want to do is begin with the assumption that nature is going to fail and screw up and that it needs us to improve on it. I want to begin with the assumption that God designed it brilliantly and good. And so probably 90% of the time, we don't have to do anything to help it along. Just like we don't have to help a chick come out of an egg or a butterfly come out of its chrysalis, right? So those are my thoughts. If you have your own thoughts, I would love to see them in the comments. And if this resonates with you, you will definitely feel very much at home inside of Embrace Birth Journey, which is the membership that I run for women of faith pursuing undisturbed home births. That's basically what it is. It's like a safe space for us to learn and grow together and pursue God through our birth stories as a holistically transformative experience that changes us for life in our pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So because this foundation and this filter is what guided the creation of that resource. So you're welcome to join us there if this resonates with you. But thanks so much for coming up and listening in on this. And I hope you have a really blessed remainder of your day, whatever that holds. Talk to you soon.